In the sweltering heat of Philadelphia, James Wilson sat on the edge of his bed, staring at an old boxing poster that adorned his apartment wall. The poster featured Muhammad Ali, arms raised in victory after defeating George Foreman in the legendary Rumble in the Jungle fight of 1974. As a 35-year-old boxing trainer with dreams bigger than his bank account, James found constant inspiration in that historic match. The morning light filtered through thin curtains as James prepared for another day at Morton's Gym, a modest establishment where he trained aspiring fighters from the neighborhood. His phone buzzed with a text from his most promising student, Marcus, who had his first professional fight in 2 weeks. "Coach, saw Tyson's knockout reel last night. Think I should focus more on power punches today?" James sighed. Marcus was talented, but often seduced by flashy techniques and highlight reels. He had been trying to teach the young fighter that boxing was as much about intelligence as it was about strength, a lesson perfectly exemplified by Ali's victory over Foreman. At the gym, the familiar scent of sweat and determination greeted James as he walked through the doors. Marcus was already there, shadowboxing in front of the mirror, throwing haymakers that would impress onlookers but leave him vulnerable in an actual fight. "Those big swings look impressive," James said, setting down his bag, "but they'll drain your energy and leave you open." "But coach, my opponent is scared of power punches. I can end it early if I catch him." James gestured to the ring. "Let's talk about Ali and Foreman for a minute." As they sat on the edge of the canvas, James began to explain the significance of that historic bout. When Ali faced Foreman in 1974, everyone thought he would get destroyed. Foreman was younger, stronger, and had knocked out both Joe Frazier and Ken Norton, 2 men who had beaten Ali. "So how did Ali win?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. "George Foreman was great," James replied, "but he was small compared to the intelligence of Muhammad Ali. While Foreman had raw power, Ali had strategy. He understood that boxing isn't just about who hits harder, it's about who thinks better. Ali used what became known as the rope-a-dope technique, letting Foreman throw punches and gradually tire himself out," James continued. "But there was more to it than just absorbing punishment. Ali studied his opponent, identified weaknesses, and created a plan that played to his own strengths." Marcus looked skeptical, but everyone knows the strongest fighter usually wins. "That's what everyone thought about Foreman too," James replied. "Let me show you something." He pulled out his tablet and showed Marcus footage of the fight. "Watch how Ali constantly whispered to Foreman, taunting him, saying things like, 'That all you got, George?' and 'Show me something, George.' This psychological warfare was just as important as the physical battle." As they watched the footage, James pointed out how Ali's technique evolved throughout the fight. The precise counterpunches, the way he conserved energy, the calculated risks. It wasn't just about being a dope on the ropes. It was about courage, ring cunning, and the kind of skills only a true boxing master can possess. "Look at round 8, James said. "Foreman is exhausted from throwing wild punches that mostly missed or were deflected. Then Ali, who had been conserving energy, saw his opportunity and struck with precision. The video showed Ali unleashing a quick combination that sent Foreman spinning to the canvas. The victory wasn't just a triumph of endurance. It was a masterclass in strategic thinking. That's what I want you to understand," James told Marcus. "Power is nothing without intelligence to direct it. Ali won that fight in his mind before he won it with his fists." As their training session progressed, James could see Marcus beginning to implement more thoughtful techniques, setting up combinations rather than just throwing haymakers, paying attention to his footwork, and thinking about energy conservation. Later, that evening, as James walked home through the Philadelphia streets, he reflected on his own journey as a trainer. Like Marcus, he had once been enamored with power and spectacle. It had taken years to understand that the greatest victories in boxing and in life came not just from physical strength, but from mental fortitude. Reaching his apartment, James looked again at the Ali poster. The inscription beneath it read, "The fight is won or lost far away from witnesses, behind the lines, in the gym, and out there on the road, long before I dance under those lights." Tomorrow would bring another day of training, another opportunity to instill in Marcus the lesson that had taken James so long to learn. True strength begins in the mind. If this story has made you feel something, even something small, don't leave without giving back. Comment and subscribe now. Subscribe. The following morning brought a downpour that drummed against the windows of Morton's gym. The weather had deterred many of the regular patrons, leaving the facility nearly empty, except for James and Marcus, who were taking advantage of the quiet to focus on their training session. "Today, we're going to work on something different," James announced, setting up a small projector he had borrowed from his friend who taught at the local community college. "Before we get physical, we need to get mental." Marcus raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical about any training that didn't involve gloves and sweat. "We only have 2 weeks left, coach. Shouldn't we be focusing on conditioning?" "Your body is ready," James replied, connecting his tablet to the projector. "But your mind still needs work, and in boxing, that's where the real advantage lies." The projector illuminated the wall with footage of several historical boxing matches, starting with Ali versus Foreman. James had carefully selected clips that demonstrated how mental warfare and psychological tactics had determined the outcome of legendary bouts. "Look at Ali here," James pointed out. "Everyone remembers his famous quote about floating like a butterfly and stinging like a bee. But what people often miss is that Ali wasn't just describing his physical style, he was declaring his strategic approach." They watched as Ali danced around opponents, conserving energy, studying movements, and striking at precisely the right moments. The contrast between Ali's approach and Foreman's relentless power punching was stark. Foreman was physically stronger, James explained. He could hit harder than almost anyone in history. But Ali understood something more valuable. He knew how to make his opponent fight his fight. The footage shifted to show interviews before the rumble in the jungle. Ali was animated, confident, taunting Foreman with predictions and poems. Foreman, meanwhile, appeared stoic and intimidating, but said little. Ali wasn't just talking to hear himself speak, James continued. Every word was calculated to get inside Foreman's head, to make him angry, to make him want to throw big punches early. Marcus leaned forward, genuinely intrigued. So he was baiting him? Exactly. Ali knew that Foreman's power was dangerous, but also that his conditioning wasn't his strongest asset. So he created a psychological trap. He made Foreman so eager to knock him out that he exhausted himself trying. Next, James showed footage of the preparation both fighters underwent. While Foreman focused almost exclusively on power training, Ali incorporated strategy sessions, studying Foreman's patterns and tendencies. "See, this is what separates good fighters from great ones," James explained. "Good fighters train their bodies. Great fighters train their minds to control the fight." They spent the next hour analyzing various aspects of psychological warfare in boxing, how fighters used feints to create false openings, how they employed subtle taunts to provoke emotional responses, and how they maintained composure when under pressure. "I want you to start keeping a fight journal," James told Marcus as they finally moved to physical training. "Before bed each night, visualize your upcoming fight. See yourself implementing what we've discussed, adapting to challenges, staying calm under pressure." As they worked the heavy bag, James noticed a difference in Marcus's approach. His punches were more measured, his movements more deliberate. He was thinking about each strike rather than simply unleashing power. "You know," Marcus said between rounds, "I always thought boxing was mostly about who's stronger or faster. Never really considered how much of it happens up here. He tapped his temple. That's what I've been trying to tell you, James replied. Muhammad Ali wasn't just a physical specimen. He was a chess master who happened to wear boxing gloves. After training, they sat on the steps outside the gym as the rain finally subsided. The streets glistened under the emerging sunlight as pedestrians ventured out with umbrellas folded. "Coach," Marcus said thoughtfully, "do you think I have what it takes? Not just physically, but mentally." James considered the question carefully. Intelligence in the ring isn't about book smarts or street smarts. It's about self-awareness, adaptability, and emotional control. I've seen you grow in all three areas. But sometimes I still get caught up in the moment, like I forget everything we've worked on. That's normal. Even Ali had moments of doubt. The difference is, he prepared for them in advance. He had contingency plans for when things went sideways. As they parted ways, James reminded Marcus of their evening session the next day. "And don't forget your journal. I want to hear what you visualized." Walking home, James stopped at a small bookstore and purchased a biography of Muhammad Ali that he'd been meaning to read. The cover featured Ali standing over Sonny Liston, another opponent who had been favored to win based on physical prowess, alone. That night, as rain returned to tap against his windows, James read about Ali's upbringing, his challenges, and his evolution as both a fighter and a thinker. He was struck by how much Ali's journey paralleled what he was trying to teach Marcus, that limitations could be overcome not just through physical training, but through mental mastery. The biography quoted Ali, "The man who has no imagination has no wings." James underlined the passage, thinking it perfectly captured what separated fighters like Ali from the rest. It wasn't just about having skills, it was about having the imagination to use those skills in ways opponents couldn't anticipate. As he closed the book and prepared for bed, James found himself visualizing Marcus's upcoming fight just as he had instructed his student to do. In his mind's eye, he saw not just a physically prepared fighter, but one who carried the wisdom of boxing's greatest strategic minds into the ring. The real training, James knew, was just beginning. 1 week before the fight, Morton's gym buzzed with unusual energy. Word had spread about Marcus's upcoming professional debut, drawing local boxing enthusiasts, former fighters, and curious onlookers to watch his final preparations. Among them was Carlos Ramirez, a veteran trainer whose fighters had claimed several regional titles over the years. James had arranged for today's session to feature sparring with Dion Jackson, a boxer whose style closely resembled that of Marcus's. Upcoming opponent, aggressive, power-focused and relentless. The sparring match would be the true test of whether Marcus had internalized the strategic lessons James had been emphasizing. "Remember what we discussed," James said quietly as he helped Marcus with his gloves. "This isn't about trading power shots. It's about controlling the fight with your mind." Marcus nodded, his expression focused in a way James hadn't seen before. The young fighter had been diligently keeping his visualization journal, and their discussions about fight psychology had grown increasingly sophisticated. As the sparring session began, Dion immediately pressed forward with heavy punches, just as expected. Rather than meeting force with force, Marcus employed subtle movement, creating angles that diminished Dion's power while conserving his own energy. "Good," James called out. "Make him work for everything." From the corner of his eye, James noticed Carlos Ramirez watching intently, his expression a mixture of surprise and approval. The veteran trainer had known Marcus as an exclusively power-oriented fighter, and this more cerebral approach was clearly unexpected. In the second round, Dion began to show signs of frustration. His punches grew wider, his footwork less disciplined. Marcus capitalized by delivering precise counters that weren't necessarily devastating, but scored cleanly and maintained his control of the pace. "He's fighting your fight now," James said. during the break between rounds. Just like Ali made Foreman fight his fight, the third round demonstrated even more clearly that Marcus had embraced the strategic approach. When Dion launched a particularly aggressive flurry, Marcus employed a version of the rope-a-dope, absorbing some blows on his gloves and arms, while Dion exhausted himself. Then, seeing his opportunity, Marcus unleashed a perfectly timed combination that sent Dion stumbling backward. After 4 rounds, James called an end to the sparring session. Both fighters had performed admirably, but the difference in their approaches was evident to everyone watching. Dion had relied primarily on power and aggression, while Marcus had employed a multifaceted strategy that combined defense, timing, and psychological manipulation. As the crowd dispersed, Carlos Ramirez approached James. "Impressive work with the kid," he said, nodding toward Marcus, who was now unwrapping his hands. "He used to be all about the knockout. Now he's actually boxing." "We've been studying the greats," James replied. "Particularly Ali's approach against Foreman." Carlos chuckled. "That's setting the bar pretty high, don't you think?" "It's not about matching Ali's skills," James explained. "It's about understanding his mindset, the way he approached opponents. Not just physically, but psychologically. Well, whatever you're doing, it's working. Kid looks like a different fighter." After Carlos left, James and Marcus sat down to review video of the sparring session. James had recorded it specifically for this purpose, to show Marcus the tangible results of their strategic training. "See here." James pointed to a sequence where Marcus had baited Dion into overcommitting to a punch. "You created that opening with your footwork and that subtle head feint. That's exactly what we talked about, using psychology to create physical opportunities." Marcus nodded, studying the footage with newfound appreciation. "It felt different today, coach, like I could almost see what he was going to do before he did it." "That's pattern recognition," James explained. "Your brain is processing all the subtle cues, weight shifts, eye movements, breathing patterns. Ali was a master at that. He could read opponents like books." Later that evening, as they shared a meal at a small diner near the gym, Marcus opened up about his evolving perspective on boxing. "You know, I used to think George Foreman was the fighter I should emulate," he admitted. "All that raw power, those knockouts. But now I'm seeing that Ali's approach actually gives you more control, more options." James smiled, gratified by his student's insight. "George Foreman was great," he said, echoing his earlier words, "but he was small compared to the intelligence of Muhammad Ali, and that's what made the difference when they met in the ring." "Do you think I'm ready?" Marcus asked, the question revealing a vulnerability beneath his growing confidence. James considered his answer carefully. "You're ready to implement what you've learned. You're ready to approach this fight as a thinking athlete, not just a physical one. The rest will come down to how well you adapt in the moment." As they finished their meal, James shared a final thought that had been forming throughout the day. "You know, there's something else we can learn from Ali. He didn't just study boxing, he studied himself. He knew his own tendencies, his own weaknesses, just as well as he knew his opponents. That self-knowledge gave him an edge that pure, physical training never could." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I think I'm starting to understand that too. It's not just about knowing your opponent's patterns, it's about recognizing your own." Walking back to his apartment that night, James felt a sense of accomplishment unlike any he'd experienced in his training career. He wasn't just preparing Marcus for a fight. He was helping shape a complete boxer, one who understood that the most powerful muscle in the ring wasn't the bicep or the shoulder, it was the brain. The real test would come in 1 week's time, but regardless of the outcome, James knew that Marcus had already won a more important victory. He had evolved from a fighter who relied solely on physical gifts to one who understood the profound advantage of intelligence in the sweet science. Fight night arrived with the electric anticipation that always accompanied such events. But for James and Marcus, there was a calm center within the storm. They had arrived at the venue 3 hours early, methodically going through their pre-fight routine in a small dressing room that smelled of liniment and nervous energy. "How are you feeling?" James asked, as he helped Marcus warm up with light. "Pad work. Focused," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "Clear." The transformation in his student over these past weeks had been remarkable. Gone was the young fighter who sought only to overwhelm opponents with power. In his place stood an athlete who understood that true dominance in the ring came from a synthesis of physical ability and strategic thinking. Tonight's opponent, Darius Wells, had built a reputation as a fearsome puncher who had knocked out his first 4 professional opponents, none lasting beyond the 3rd round. The local boxing press had labeled Marcus as the underdog, focusing on Wells's power advantage while dismissing Marcus's more technical approach. "They're underestimating you," James said, as they took a break from the warm-up. "Just like they underestimated Ali against Foreman." Marcus nodded, a slight smile crossing his face. "That gives us the advantage." As the time for the fight drew closer, the arena filled with spectators. Among them were familiar faces from Morton's gym, Carlos Ramirez, and even a few local boxing journalists who had been intrigued by rumors of Marcus's evolution as a fighter. In the final moments before they walked out, James held Marcus's gaze. "Remember, this fight starts in the mind. Control the pace, recognize the patterns, make him fight your fight." "Like Ali did," Marcus replied. "Exactly like Ali did." The walk to the ring passed in a blur of lights and noise. Wells was already waiting, bouncing on his toes with obvious eagerness to begin. His physique was impressive, heavily muscled with the kind of definition that suggested explosive power. Several spectators near the ring were already calling for a quick knockout. As the referee gave final instructions, Wells attempted to intimidate Marcus with an intense stare, but Marcus remained composed, his eyes calm and focused. This psychological battle, invisible to most observers, was already underway. The bell rang, and Wells charged forward immediately, launching powerful hooks that would have ended the fight had they connected cleanly. Marcus, however, employed subtle movements, slipping, rolling, creating angles that diminished the impact of those explosive shots. "That's it," James called from the corner. "Make him work." By the end of the first round, Wells had thrown dozens of power punches but landed few cleanly. Meanwhile, Marcus had scored consistently with quick, precise counter-punches that weren't devastating, but were clearly registering with the judges. "He's getting frustrated," James observed during the break. "Keep calm, keep to the plan." The second round followed a similar pattern, with Wells becoming increasingly aggressive as his initial strategy failed to produce results. Marcus continued to fight intelligently, conserving energy while allowing Wells to expend his in increasingly wild attacks. By the 3rd round, the point at which Wells had finished all his previous opponents, a change was visible in both fighters. Wells was breathing heavily, his punches losing some of their snap. Marcus, meanwhile, remained fresh, his movements efficient, his mind clear. "Now," James said as Marcus returned to the corner, "he's tired. This is where you start to take control." Second, the 4th round, Marcus subtly shifted his approach, becoming more offensive while maintaining his defensive awareness. He began to land combinations that visibly affected Wells, whose reactions were slowing as fatigue set in. The 5th round brought the decisive moment. Wells, desperate to turn the tide, launched a massive overhand right that left him completely exposed. Marcus, having anticipated this move from studying Wells' tendencies, slipped the punch and delivered a perfect counter combination that sent Wells staggering back into the ropes. The crowd erupted as Marcus pressed his advantage, delivering precise, measured punches that forced the referee to step in and stop the fight. Victory by technical knockout. not through overwhelming power, but through strategic brilliance. As Marcus's hand was raised in victory, James felt a profound sense of validation. Their journey together had produced not just a win, but a demonstration of boxing's highest principles, that intelligence, properly applied, could overcome seemingly insurmountable physical advantages. Later, as they sat in the dressing room amidst congratulations from well-wishers, Marcus turned to James with a look of deep understanding. "I get it now, Coach," he said quietly. "What you've been teaching me all along. It wasn't just about winning. This fight, it was about approaching boxing as a complete art, where the mind leads and the body follows." James nodded, thinking of the Ali poster that had inspired their journey. That's exactly it, and this is just the beginning. As they gathered their equipment to leave, a reporter approached for a quick interview. "What made the difference tonight?" he asked Marcus. "Wells was favored to win by knockout." Marcus glanced at James before answering. "Someone once told me that George Foreman was great, but he was small compared to the intelligence of Muhammad Ali. Tonight I tried to embody that principle, to show that in boxing, as in life, the greatest strength isn't in your fists, but in your mind." Walking out of the arena into the cool night air, James felt a sense of completion. The lesson had come full circle. Just as Ali had demonstrated the power of intelligence over brute force decades ago, Marcus had now carried that legacy forward, proving once again that the sweet science was indeed as much about science as it was about sweating. Their conversation continued as they made their way through the parking lot, already discussing not just Marcus's next fight, but how to further refine their approach to training both body and mind. The journey, James knew, was just beginning, but they were now traveling a path illuminated by one of boxing's greatest truths, that true greatness emerges when physical gifts are guided by strategic intelligence. If you made it this far and felt every word, won't you leave without subscribing? I tell these stories with my heart in my hands, to reach people like you, who feel, who get emotional, who truly live. If this touched you deeply, give back. Comment, subscribe. Come, be part of this family with me until the next video.